Okay, on Palestine, the 1939 Palestine MacDonald White Paper violates the Balfour Doctrine and encourages Arabs to fight Jewish settlements all the more by violent means. Let's go to the table. No, let's get some more arms and ammunition. Okay. By the end of 1939, April, the Palestine White Paper was finalized, imposing upon Palestine severe restrictions which would fix an upper limit of 100,000 on the number of Jewish immigrants to be admitted over the following 5 years, after which the Arabs would have an effective veto on any further Jewish immigration. Talk about manipulation. MacDonald told his cabinet colleagues on May 1st, certain limp points had been inserted to meet Arab pressure and which, perhaps, would have been omitted if the matter were looked on its strict merits. The House of Commons debated the new white paper, against which Leopold Amory spoke with much force, telling the House that the government's watchword had now become appease the Arabs, and to do so by breaking faith with the Jews, especially with the Balfour Doctrine. Amory went on, the MacDonald White Paper is a direct invitation to the Arabs to continue to make trouble. As for the Jews, they are now told that all the hopes that they have been encouraged to hold on to for 20 years are to be dashed to the ground, all the pledges and promises broken. They, the Palestinian Jews, are a formidable body of people. They are composed largely of younger men who have undergone military training and are quite capable of defending themselves if only we allowed them. The British says, we'll protect you, and then they didn't allow protection. Winston Churchill spoke with force and bitterness against what he believed was both a betrayal of the Balfour Declaration and a shameful act of appeasement. Churchill drew attention to the large Arab as well as Jewish immigration into Palestine since the beginning of the mandate. Not only Jewish immigrants, but Arab immigrants have been drawn to Palestine by its newfound prosperity. Due to whom? The Jews. And the Arabs, like the Jews, have been drawn from a wide geographic area. The MacDonald White Paper, known henceforth to the Jews as the Black Paper, led not only to widespread distress among world Jewry and strong protests throughout the Jewish community in Palestine, but also to a widespread feeling among the majority of Jews, both in Palestine and beyond, that henceforth the future, not only of Jewish immigration into Palestine, but of the whole nature of a future Jewish entity there, depended first and foremost not upon the British, with whom power lay, but upon the renewed efforts, struggles, and perseverance of the Jews themselves. By making this the possibility of Jewish statehood the more remote, and even impossible, the MacDonald White Paper had the reverse effect to their intentions by stimulating and sharpening the Jewish goal of statehood and full independence. Toward the Abyss, July-December 1939. During the summer of 1939, the number of Jewish illegal immigrants seeking to reach Palestine grew considerably. In response to the British government continued with mounting vigor to seek to stop the ships reaching Palestine. During the autumn of 1939, the British government made several attempts to influence the United States' opinion against the illegal immigration. In his article, New Testament writer Levy wrote, under normal conditions, illegal immigrants constitute the best constructive elements for the country, since those whose entry is effected with the approval of national Jewish organizations are previously trained for Palestine life and labor conditions. But groups organized by the revisionists are based on the wider assumption that any Jew willing to go to Palestine is acceptable. It is no secret that the Jewish population of Palestine is sympathetic and helpful to all organizations now taking the latter wider view. It is interesting to note that even the Palestine Arabs in general are not antagonistic toward these illegal immigrants. Many of the latter recount instances of Arab charity when they wandered unknowingly into Arab villages. While some of the fellahin ran to report them to the police, the refugees report otherwise sheltered the newcomers, sharing their bread and olives. To show its displeasure at the continuation of illegal immigration, the government had decided a short while ago to suspend all legal immigration. At the same time, illegal immigrant ships would still be intercepted and turned back. Jewish refugees were being denied entry into more and more countries. Many other countries were tightening their entry regulations and frontier controls. On September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. in view of severe persecutions versus Jews in Poland, relaxation of British colonial restrictions met with negative response. With the coming of war, the British government had not only continued, but even intensified its attempts to halt the flow of illegal Jewish refugees. Throughout the winter months of 1939 and 1940, while the British were thus fighting the illegal Jewish immigration, the Germans were imposing their evil rule upon Poland. For the Jews of Palestine, war had brought a new spirit of determination. Recruitment and a desire to serve the Allied cause went parallel with the hope of bringing in, legally or illegally, as many European Jews as could escape the torment of Nazi rule. Churchill, now First Lord of the Admiralty, urged Parliament to form a Jewish army in Palestine to aid in the war effort. It might have been thought a matter for satisfaction that the Jews in Palestine should possess arms and be capable of providing for their own defense. They were the only trustworthy friends we had in that country, and they were much more under our control than the scattered Arab population to replace the 11 infantry battalions hitherto locked up in Palestine. Churchill was not successful. There was fear of repercussions throughout the Muslim world. This same war, Cabinet of February 12, 1940, discussed the 1939 White Paper decision to limit Jewish land purchase in Palestine. The land purchase regulations were put into force. Despite the setback to their position in Palestine, the Jews now pressed for the creation of a specifically Jewish military force which could fight the Germans, but both the Foreign Office and the War Office opposed it. Early in November 1940, 2 ships reached Haifa with 1,771 illegal immigrants. The High Commissioner refused to allow them to land, and they were transferred to a French liner to deport them to the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. But Churchill raised an objection. Churchill's telegram was decisive. The Patria deportees were allowed to remain in Palestine, first in the internment camp at Athlit, and within a year at Liberty. But in response to this, the British government suspended the quota for legal immigration for 3 months. Subsequently, the quota for April to September 1941 was also suspended, and there were punitive measures for those Jewish immigrants on the Patria. Conditions of the detention of the deportees should be sufficiently punitive to continue to act as a deterrent to other Jews in Eastern Europe. Wow. As the war continued, the Zionists were appalled by the mounting campaign of terror against the Jews of Poland, and by the continuing refusal of the British government to modify in any way the immigration of land purchase restrictions of the 1939 White Paper. Beyond the Abyss, 1939 to 1942. From the moment that the Germans marched into Poland in September 1939, Nazi sadism found horrific outlets on Polish Jewry. Only a tiny remnant of the Jews of German-occupied Russia survived the Nazi executions. Wow. Just look the other way. Holocaust, resistance, and flight. Following the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, the Nazis began the systematic deportation and murder of Jews from all over Europe. Their destination was the death camps, most of which had been set up on Polish soil. For every death in Europe, there could have been a refugee received in safety in Palestine. By the time of Germany's surrender in May 1945, 6 million Jews had been murdered. Many others at forced labor camps. Others had been shot dead while on the march, or left to die of hunger on the roadside. Others starved to death without even water in the sealed railway trucks, some at the hands of doctors sadistically experimenting. Haj Amin, the Mufti, had gone to Berlin, where on April 8th he expressed publicly the sympathy of the Arab nation for Germany. Who was the enemy of the Allies? The Arabs. Who did the British side with? The Arabs. And offered Hitler the active support of the Arabs. The Arabs on Hitler's side. Sir Harold MacMichael rejected Iraqi Jewish immigration in view of persecution in Iraq on the grounds that there was no work for them to do. This in spite of the Jewish Agency's assertion the previous April that there was a shortage of more than 4,000 agricultural workers on Jewish farms and settlements. Under a previous War Cabinet decision of 27, 1940, November, all illegal immigrants who had been detained would have been deported to the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. and held there until the end of the war, where they would be released on condition that they went elsewhere than Palestine. Wow. And who are your allies? The Biltmore Program. On May 6, 1942, an extraordinary Zionist conference in New York, its theme, Jews could no longer depend upon Britain to establish a national home in Palestine. The majority of the delegates were committed to the establishment of Palestine as a Jewish commonwealth, as well as an end to all immigration restrictions. Churchill's memorandum. We have certainly treated the Arabs very well, having installed King Faisal and his descendants upon the throne of Iraq and maintained them there, having maintained the Emir Abdullah in Transjordania, and having asserted the rights of self-government for the Arabs and other inhabitants of Syria. With the exception of Ibn Saud and the Emir Abdullah, both of whom have been good and faithful followers, the Arabs have been virtually of no use to us in this present war. They've taken no part in the fighting except in so far as they were involved in the Iraq rebellion against us. They have created no new claims upon the Allies should we be victorious. Yet, in the British House of Commons, pressure continued to try to create an Allied open door for those refugees who did manage to escape from Europe. Despite his preoccupations with the conduct of the war, Churchill had continued to support the idea of an eventual Jewish national home in Palestine with the Jewish majority. But as the war progressed, he had begun to accept the arguments which the Peel Commission had put forward before the war, and which many Jews had also accepted, albeit reluctantly, in favor of two separate states in Palestine, one Arab and one Jewish. The Irgun Jewish Terrorism Organization is formed. Inside Palestine, a tiny group of desperate Jews felt unable either to trust Britain's word or to wait until the war was over, calling themselves the Irgun Zavai Lumai, the National Military Organization, and holding Jabotinsky as their inspiration. In January 1944, they called upon the Jews of Palestine to revolt. Their demand was immediate transfer of power from Eretz Israel to a provisional Hebrew government. Their method, expressed succinctly by their leader, Menachem Begin, and his memoirs, the revolt was a prolonged campaign of destruction. The answer to terrorism by Arabs, is Jewish terrorism. Jewish terrorism had broken out against the British in Palestine. Lloyd Moyne was assassinated in Cairo by the two young Jews. On the other hand, the deliberate murder of Europe's Jews was reaching its terrible climax, with more than 5 million Jews having already perished, and hundreds of thousands more being murdered each month. For the British policymakers, however, the overriding concern still seemed to remain that of the Jewish refugees seeking to reach Palestine. From Palestine itself, despite the intense bitterness created by the anti-refugee policy, 33,000 Jews enlisted in the British Army, compared with a total of 9,000 Arabs. Long before the end of the war, this total was reduced by at least one-half through desertions and discharges. Boy, you just can't get enough, can you? The Jewish death toll will never be fully known. Among the 1.5 million children who were murdered were many whose names were never recorded. Hundreds of thousands of individuals whose names were found before the war in lists of doctors, nurses, or teachers, students, or lawyers, writers, or poets disappeared without trace. In the Nazi lists of those deported by train to the concentration camps, tens of thousands of them, as far away as France, Belgium, Italy, and Greece, are many whose exact fate is unknown. That they were murdered is certain. 6 million is the million figure of those who perished. Yet Britain keeps backtracking. Closing the door, Justice and Revolt, 1945 to 1946. With the end of the war in Europe, May 8, 1945, Jews all over the world hoped and expected that the doors of Palestine would be opened for the survivors of the Holocaust. On May 22, 1945, 2 weeks after the German surrender, Dr. Weizmann wrote direct to Churchill to ask that the Jewish immigration be resumed. But in his reply on June 8, Churchill informed Weizmann that there could be no possibility of the question being effectively considered until the proposed peace conference. Wow. Weizmann, after 6 million deaths, Weizmann was appalled by this decision to delay what was, for the survivors of the Holocaust, a matter of urgency. On June 13th, he replied to Churchill that the contents of Churchill's letter had come as a great shock to him. President Truman's wish that the survivors of the concentration camps should be allowed into